Leo was the kind of man who carried silence in his eyes. You know the type, the ones who walk into a room and somehow make less noise than the shadows themselves. He wasn't always like that, or at least that's what the fragments of his past suggest. But by the time you would have met him, if you had, the spark was already dimmed, the fight already leaving his bones. He lived like a ghost, long before he ever became one. His story is not unique, and maybe that's the tragedy of it. Because there are millions of people like Leo, people who quietly give up on life long before anyone notices. They fade not with a dramatic collapse, but with a slow, quiet erosion of hope. And if you look closely, you might even recognize pieces of yourself in him. Leo grew up in a small town tucked somewhere between quiet roads and factory smoke. His father worked double shifts. His mother tried to keep the family together with tired hands and a strained smile. There wasn't much tenderness in his house, but there wasn't much cruelty either. Just the cold indifference of survival. That's the first thing you learn in stories like Leo's. Sometimes it's not the storms that break people. It's the constant drizzle, the unrelenting greyness of an ordinary struggle. As a boy, Leo used to dream. He dreamed of being an artist, of filling sketchbooks with worlds no one had ever seen. But his drawings taped to the refrigerator with cheap magnets were always treated as childish distractions. That's nice, his parents would say, but never more than that. Praise was rationed like bread in his house. And slowly, almost invisibly, he started believing what the world suggested, that his passions were not practical, that his worth was measured only in what he could endure, not what he could create. By the time he was a teenager, those sketchbooks had disappeared, replaced by long hours working part-time jobs. Statistics show that young people who are forced to take on adult responsibilities too early often experience higher levels of stress, depression, and burnout later in life. Leo was a living proof of that. His childhood ended not with a bang, but with a time card punched into a machine. Still, he tried. He kept pushing forward. That's another important detail. People like Leo don't give up all at once. They give up gradually, first on small things, then on medium things, and eventually on the big ones. Leo gave up on his dream of college, then on friendships that required too much effort, then on love. Because why risk heartbreak when numbness was easier? Every surrender made the next one simpler. By his 20s, Leo was surviving, but not living. He woke up, went to work, came home, scrolled through his phone, and slept day after day, year after year. The algorithm served him an endless rotation of distractions. Funny clips, tragic news, fleeting pleasures, and slowly his nervous system adapted to this new kind of fragmented reality, where emotions were scattered like puzzle pieces that never formed a whole. He wasn't alone in this. Studies from the last 2 decades show a sharp rise in anxiety and depression, particularly among young adults, coinciding with the rise of social media and overstimulation. Leo wasn't defective. He was reacting exactly the way a human being reacts when submerged in chaos. But here's the thing. When you're in the middle of it, it never feels systemic. It feels personal. Leo thought his numbness was his fault. His inability to feel joy, his lack of motivation, his endless fatigue. He believed these were signs of some fundamental flaw inside him. And so Leo gave up. Not in one dramatic moment, but in 1,000 tiny choices. He stopped returning calls from old friends. He stopped cooking real meals. He stopped cleaning his apartment until dishes piled like monuments to neglect. And eventually, he stopped looking in the mirror because he couldn't stand the eyes that stared back. Now, if you were to meet Leo then, you might not have noticed. He still smiled politely at work. He still nodded along in conversations. He still said, "I'm fine," when asked how he was doing. Because giving up doesn't always look like falling apart. Sometimes it looks like functioning. Sometimes it looks like a person who is quietly erasing themselves while still wearing the mask of normalcy. And here's the brutal truth. Society rarely notices people like Leo until it's too late. We live in a world that rewards productivity, not presence. As long as Leo showed up to work, paid his bills, and stayed out of trouble, no one asked if he was okay. And when they did, they wanted the short answer, not the real one. That's one of the cruelties of modern life. We are surrounded by people, but many of us are deeply alone. But let's pause here. Let's step back from Leo's personal story and look at the bigger picture. Because Leo's life, as heartbreaking as it is not just the story of one man. It's the story of a culture that quietly teaches people to give up. Consider this. Research from the World Health Organization shows that depression is now the leading cause of disability worldwide. Over 300 million people are affected. Anxiety disorders follow closely behind. These aren't just statistics. They are reflections of millions of lives like Leo's. Lives where hope slowly withers under the weight of pressure, disconnection, and relentless expectations. And yet most solutions offered are directed inward. Fix yourself, heal yourself, optimize yourself. Take a pill, download an app, read a book, do some breathing exercises. And while those tools can help, they also reinforce a dangerous idea that the problem is solely you, that your sadness is a malfunction, instead of what it really is, a very human response to an overwhelming reality. Leo never learned that. He thought he was broken, and because he believed he was broken, he never asked for help. He never told anyone the full depth of his despair. He just faded. But what if we looked at Leo's life differently? What if, instead of seeing him as a man who failed to cope, we saw him as a mirror reflecting back the cracks in our systems, our communities, our culture? Maybe Leo wasn't weak. Maybe he was just unbearably human in a world that keeps demanding we act like machines. And this is where the lesson begins to unfold. Giving up on life is rarely about laziness or weakness. More often, it's about exhaustion. It's about people who carry more than they can possibly hold until their spirit quietly fractures under the weight.